And welcome back to Sovereign Sanity, a source of sovereign clarity and expansion. This is video number 5. So far, we've taken a look at sovereignty, related to the individual and the government, the significance of rights and freedoms, the establishment of authority, and the requirement for individual consent. In the last video, we brought forward a one-page summary of jurisdictions or rule books related to the establishment of authority, and that started to bring to the surface the phrase that I'm referring to as sovereign voice. And in this video, we're going to continue to dive deeper into the phrase sovereign voice and show you how you can call upon your historic individual authority to help protect your rights and freedoms. And we're going to do this today by taking a look at justice interaction videos and looking at those videos from a sovereign cross-examination perspective. And we're also going to cross-examine some short video clips from a modern lawyer who had done some research on the subject of sovereignty. But first, let's review the summary that was put forward in the last video, as I'm trying to use this visual moving forward and keep it as easy to follow and understand as possible. I'd like to highlight a couple of changes. First of all, I'm using the term sovereign voice, and I recognize that not everyone will relate with that term. So, I've changed the word sovereign here to intrinsic. You were born intrinsic. And I've changed the word sovereign being to the being. I'm also recognizing that not everyone would recognize with their person. So I've changed the word from your person to the person. And since I'm stating that supreme sovereign authority pretty much boils down to integrity in order to claim it and keep it active and recognized and defendable, I've decided to put the word integrity up with sovereign. So here's where we are so far. We've used this visual to follow the path in the establishment of authority leading up to the most current form of governments and sovereign authority. So, the appearance of something, and then the appearance of someone. So, the individual authorities coming together as collective beliefs based on common senses, which would form into common law as the most recognized historic form of authority under a lawful jurisdiction, and the formation of the rights and freedoms shield. So then, if you were accused of committing a crime, whether or not you had a family name or you still didn't relate to any name in particular, you would be brought to the collective authority to determine the validity of the accusation and assess accountability or liability if necessary. So then, with the expansion of humanity came the expansion of governments, and the key question that's getting back to what we're focusing on with this video series is, does it make a difference if you're using your person, the capacity of the most current lawful authority, legal authority, or using the capacity of your being, a more historic form of authority? Because the summary is, you've got individual authority coming together, forming a collective authority, and then how do you find balance between that? Or a question might be, what gives any others a right to question your authority? And as we dive deeper into that question, it's important to determine one of two things. Is the question or the accusation coming from another individual authority? Or is the question or accusation coming from the collective authority? And then based on the interaction of the accusation, what if at any point the individual questions whether or not the accusation is valid? You know, something doesn't quite seem right. What if the individual is wondering whether or not it's an unjust use of authority? So as we dive deeper into the question, what gives any others a right to question your authority? Here's the key questions. Number 1, is there a claim or concern from the collective? Meaning, does an individual's actions or words affect any other's safety? So, collective meaning, is there one individual that's making a claim against another individual or group? Or is the collective, as a group of individuals, usually meaning government agencies, are they making a claim on behalf of the collective? Now, it's important to also clarify that when I say claim, I'm referring to a historic crime where there's actually an injured party. Now, when I say concern, I'm referring to what's more so modernly related to statutes and acts. So things that could relate to eventually becoming a more serious crime, which are worthy of consideration. So the difference between a claim and a concern. And then the second question is there a claim or concern regarding the individual specifically? Meaning, does an individual's words or actions affect their own safety? And usually the consideration here has to do with mental health. So very real considerations regarding individuals that may truly have difficulty thinking for themselves, and in the process their actions and words may cause them to cause harm to themselves. So at that point someone might question their own authority. And or another common note is, especially from a sovereign perspective, if you're interacting with law enforcement in particular or other government agencies, if you're ever questioned whether or not your mental health is in check, it's really important that you defend it, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So on that note, so you have the collective authority coming together with the individual authority, and the question is, how do you find the balance there? And it's important as we talk about balance, I want to mention this regarding the collective authority. It's important to show respect for agents and officers or officials with integrity, because for every story that you hear about where one may be referred to as corrupted, I like to believe there's that many or more that truly do believe, based on what they know at the time, that their integrity is in check and they're doing their best to defend the collective authority and the historic rights and freedoms shield. And regarding the individual's integrity and the individual authority, that gets back to sovereign integrity or intrinsic integrity or being integrity. If you're going to claim authority and have it recognized and defendable, it's important that integrity is at the root, it would appear to me. And on that note, I would like to mention the term without prejudice. This ends up on all of my notices that I would send, and you may want to look this up on your own, but I'll quickly summarize. Without prejudice basically means the individual is interested in a solution and acknowledging somewhat that this is a learning process. And as part of that learning process, the sovereign being or being with integrity is willing to note the very likely possibility that the accuser could bring forward undeniable proof that may alter your current position or understanding on the matter. So figuring out how to deal with an accusation or what you're dealing with, I'd like to mention that reflection is helpful to determine the balance between individual authority and collective authority. Have you ever heard of the expression, putting yourself in someone else's shoes? And for some people, you might really have to go for a walk, as it appears easier to do for some than others. You know, find that place where you can be alone, or just wherever you can think to yourself openly and honestly. And as you start to evaluate, in specific if you're being accused of a crime, the first question to me would be, is it an obvious crime or concern? And if it's obvious and the answer is yes, I would say at that point, move to determining accountability and liability if necessary. This is where integrity comes into play, where you really have to be honest with yourself and decide, did I make a mistake? And it's okay to admit sometimes you made a mistake. And more often than not, an apology will really help to minimize the amount of liability that's assessed on a crime, because we are in a learning process. And that's what we are supposed to do, is remain calm, peaceful, and patient as we talk about it, so we can get back to a sense of balance between individual authority and collective authority. But the question is, what if upon your reflections you're still having difficulty settling on whether or not the accusation is valid? So at that point, what do you do? And I think that's the point when individual authority, if they're questioning the accusation, whether or not it's valid. So I just want to quickly mention, as we dive deeper into this, and we're going to talk about this more in videos to follow, the validity of a claim against an individual does have different considerations related to private land and public land. So we will be getting into that in the next couple of videos. So then, let's dive into a couple of justice interaction videos and review them from the perspective of a sovereign cross-examination.
Police have always promised to respect our charter of rights to protest.
Let's go. I'm asking you once
I just
more.
have a question, officer.
If you don't give it to me right now, I'm going to take that as a refusal again, please.
I would wonder what
Winnipeg Police Services have always
refusal means.
promised to respect our rights.
The law is right
To
now,
protest.
you're not allowed to gather in groups bigger than 5. So
That's
I've
not the
already
law.
explained to you what's going on, okay? I'll be back. And if you plan on moving the vehicle, you better give me a drive.
So he's asking for ID. He's asking this other gentleman, if you plan on moving this vehicle, I'm going to need to see your ID.
What's
You want
that?
to give it to me right now.
Okay.
This is,
There's lots of technical questions here
so,
as to the
out of
authority.
curiosity, officer, why did my license and registration had to be taken?
She asked the right
Because I
question.
didn't do anything.
Actually, you're gonna get a ticket because you're parked in a
I'm in loading. I'm loading right now. I have it.
permit required.
I could move my vehicle.
That's
So in this case,
actually, you're gonna end up
Technically,
with a ticket now, so-
she's in a
This is not right,
permit-required
officer.
spot.
I'm gonna move my vehicle.
Yeah, you're gonna move it when we're done, yeah. Receiving a provincial offense notice for parking where prohibited. Fine's $53. You can deal with it on the dates that are on there.
So let's review this interaction from the visual that we've put forward. So we're following the establishment of authority, the first original individual authority coming together as a collective authority, the collective forming the Rights and Freedoms Shield, deciding this is a standard to move forward, individual and collective coming together, finding a balance. As humanity expands, so then must the collective authority to continue defending the Rights and Freedoms Shield. So the formation of governments for this particular interaction, my guess is because it was probably related to the Highway and Traffic Act at the end, is what this officer noted. It probably would have been considered a civil matter as far as the understanding of the collective authority, and what's required for these matters to be negotiated. Well, of course, the person. So getting us back to the question, well, are we using the person, or are you relating to a more historic form of authority? And then, of course, what's being put forward here is an invitation for the individual to join the most current authority under their jurisdiction. And in this particular case, the consent was given because as soon as you give your identification, it's technically like agreeing to negotiate this matter under this jurisdiction. And in this particular case, there was no mention of the sovereign voice or any type of reference to a historic authority, common law, or any type of words that would give the established authority that is bringing forward the claim an idea that you're aware of your historic authority by using language related to administering for your person. And one might say, hey, well, if it's an obvious crime, why make it complicated? Why try to confuse people? Just use the name you were given and get on with it. And in some cases, I would agree. And I may even choose to do that at some points if I can quickly reflect and note that I had made a mistake and I should be accountable for it. So I may choose to do that. At the same time, if anything is happening that's making me question the validity of it, or I need more time to decide, I may choose to just call upon my historic authority just in case, because once you give up the jurisdiction, it could be described as a little bit harder to go back and reclaim it afterwards. So why not claim it during the accusation at the point of being accused so that it's noted? And we will talk about the importance of noting. If I was the individual that was involved with this particular interaction, here's some thoughts and ideas that come to mind from a sovereign perspective. First of all, is it obviously a crime or concern? And if yes, as mentioned, and I could reflect on it immediately, I might choose to quickly move to accountability and liability and keep it simple by using my person. But if not, and I'm questioning the validity of the authority, I might choose to call upon historic authority. So the question is, from the agent, license and registration, please. Now, the being. And of course, when I say the being, I'm referring to, in this case, myself, using my sovereign voice. The being. What if I were to choose not to provide my person? The agent. I will arrest you. And I'm noting that it is important to clearly request that they state the reason so that you know, and you're asking them to clarify their authority over you, give you as much information toward their claim over you as possible. The being. Okay, I will provide proof of my person, but I would like you to note that it was provided under protest and duress, and I recognize sovereignty, or God, as supreme authority, and therefore clearly state I am not in the capacity of my person. At this point, it's important to note that the officer may truly have no idea what you're referring to. On the other hand, some officers might have an idea of what you're referring to, and I would say it's unlikely that they would quickly acknowledge the authority that you're referring to. And in some cases, they may even move to an increased intimidation tactic, including a question such as this: are you mentally ill? And in that case, it's very important that you defend your mental health. Response from the being would be something like this: my thoughts and integrity are clear to me, and I disagree with your evaluation. Now, I would like to repeat, please confirm you will note protest and duress. Once it is noted that the identification or the person was provided under protest and duress, it is likely the officer or agent would simply move forward with doing their job, as access to the person as well as individual consent are two key requirements to move forward. So it's likely shortly after the agent will respond, "Here is your summons to appear." Now it's also important to note that this may not be the best time to turn this interaction into a roadside seminar on sovereignty, as some officers or agents may become aggravated, leading to arrest. Simply end the transaction with a polite comment: "Thank you for your service." As we move forward with this series, I'm going to continue to elaborate on using your sovereign voice related to the significance and essential importance of communicating with the collective authority through the process of filing notices. So as we continue to dive deeper into the idea of using a sovereign voice, this is a good example of the process or the language that is used when one decides to claim their historic authority when interacting with the collective authority.
I'm just an observer here today.
Yeah, okay.
I wasn't.
Okay.
I just walked by and
Well,
saw.
that's good, yeah, sure. See how this works?
I don't.
Oh, you see how this works?
I don't.
Now you're gonna get my badge number because I'm gonna give you a ticket for something. So just give me your license and registration. It's great, eh?
I'm not looking for any confrontations.
No, you're not? Then maybe you shouldn't have got out of your car and started something then. License and registration.
What did I start?
You can pull it out of there.
When I was standing out there, I was not in the capacity of my person. I'll just let you know that. Now that I'm
You were in the capacity of your person? What does that mean?
All right, sir. Here's your driver's license, registration. Okay?
Thank you.
Take care.
You as well. Thanks for your service. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, take care.
It's also a good example of the importance of remaining calm, peaceful, and patient throughout the entire interaction. Now let's take a look at this common visual to take a closer look at what took place here. Now, similar to the last interaction, although it may appear as though the officer is making a demand for the identification of the person, it's more of an assertive request. So, in this case, as I was providing the identification, and before I provided the identification of the person, I made it clear that I was administrating for my person. And this is what I refer to as using your sovereign voice. So in this particular case, I decided not to use the words protest and duress, because I had a sense I was dealing with an aggravated officer or agent for one reason or another. Now, by continuing to explain and use this type of language, I felt the aggravation may have been accelerated. So rather than trying harder to get this officer to understand what I was talking about, I recognized that the Justice Department that defends his claims already knows what I'm talking about because I've already filed my notice. Therefore, to avoid the potential of aggravating the interaction any further, I would have chosen to continue to resolve this matter peacefully after the fact. However, in this case, the result was no claim or concern. I'll expand more as to why that might be the result for me in particular after having had filed notices in the next couple of videos. But first, I really have to make an important note regarding Officer 1849. It's important to note that as of 2020, the pressure for the police departments, not just here locally in this jurisdiction, but I would imagine around the world, is somewhat intense for some individuals. And it's important that we put out this reminder. Peaceful interactions are essential toward preserving and protecting the historic rights and freedoms shield. Both the accuser and the accused are expected to maintain human dignity and integrity as part of the process. Now, I'm aware that these particular video clips might bring forward a one-sided perspective, especially regarding this particular officer. So in this case, it might be a good example when I use the reference of trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And if you want to know the full perspective of these interactions, you can check out the video on this channel called Manitoba Police Pandemic Pressure. Now, let's take a look at some short video clips from a modern lawyer doing research on the subject of sovereignty, and in particular, the information that he proposes as solutions moving forward.
What is the solution? Okay, how do we square away this this sovereign citizen status desire that a person may have? Move out, create their own, go to their own country, create their own country. If there's any land anywhere, I remember seeing an article, some father bought a piece of land somewhere in South Africa, or I'm sorry, in Africa, and it was just a tiny little piece, and he appointed himself as king so his daughter could be an actual legitimate princess, which is pretty freaking cool, if you ask me. I don't know anywhere where there's still a possibility to do that, but if you can find a piece of unoccupied land and live on it, fine. You will be able to be a sovereign citizen on that piece of land.
I'm going to call this first clip "Move Out," and it's also a great example of what might happen should one do research on the subject of sovereignty and only be introduced to what I'm referring to as the mainstream narrative on the subject. And I like to believe that the creation of this video series might help to add some integrity. Also, this lawyer appears to note that the concept of sovereignty is possible, including noting a real-life example, similar to what I had mentioned in this video series of the possibility of crossing paths with a pirate on uncharted waters, or similar to some of the stories that I'm going to be bringing forward based on my real-life experience living as a sovereign in the next couple of videos.
It would be, if there would be a nation of all sovereign citizens, they would themselves, this is what would actually happen. This is what David Hume alluded to a moment ago. They would create laws because they would realize the society that we live in is completely impossible to coexist in. You're going back to caveman times when you see your neighboring cave mate and you want to eat their piece of meat, so you club them over the head. Okay, that's why we created laws against murder, so that kind of stuff doesn't happen.
I'm going to call this clip "Sovereigns Would Create Laws." And essentially, yes, I would agree. And if you think about it from the perspective of each individual authority coming together as a collective authority, that's what we've done. Only now, 8 to 9 billion humans later, the process could start to get a little bit complicated, or maybe even overwhelming. In particular, if individual integrity starts to become out of balance for one reason or another to some significant degree.
So solution number 2 is to have a better checks and balances system, on the government. So have more lawyers, not just number lawyers, because I think we already have enough, but better lawyers. I mean, the problem is that we have a lot of lawyers who simply are willing to partner up with the machine. And it's sad and frightening to see, but it does happen sometimes. And if you have more lawyers advocating for the preservation of rights of people and actually fighting cases in court, fighting for their clients, doing jury trials, all that good stuff, which we are meant to do anyway.
I'm going to call this clip "Better Lawyers." And this is the part where I started to get a strong, trustworthy, balanced vibration from this particular individual. And I think it's safe to say that if more lawyers spoke with this level of integrity openly, it would certainly help to maintain balance.
Going back to the laws, using the laws to our advantage as they are written, taking cases to appeal, creating more law, better law. We need to evolve forward. The sovereign citizen is trying to evolve us backwards, to devolve back into times of lawlessness and cavemanship, okay? I am not following these laws. That's out of frustration with the system, I believe, okay? So maybe if we exert enough pressure and do it civilly, legally, and peacefully, we will eventually change the system.
This one is called evolve forward or backward. And I would agree that frustration with the system might be the catalyst that would cause more individuals with thoughts of sovereignty to come forward and use their sovereign voice. But I really became intrigued when he mentioned maybe if we exert enough pressure, eventually we might be able to change the system. Now we're talking.
This is a call to action to attorneys everywhere to try more cases, defend your clients to the best of your ability, even if they can't afford the full fee.
This clip is called I Can't Afford Rights and Freedoms. And on that note, it appears safe to say that if one is paying attention, that has the most significant value related to our ability to bring forward our individual integrity and our ability to work together as collective integrity.
Then I think the concept of the sovereign citizen may eventually fade away, disappear. Why? Because there'd be no need for it. Officers would be the most amazing people on the planet who would go out and simply perform their duties of maintaining the peace rather than extorting the citizens.
No more need for sovereignty? That's almost like saying there's no need for one to think deeper about who they are or where they come from and how that relates to our individual authority and what individual consent is all about.
So leave it up to the lawyers. Don't try to lawyer the system, okay? You will always fail. Pro se litigants, pro se meaning people representing themselves, are always frowned upon by the system. They're always looked down on because they don't know the laws, usually, not always. I mean, some people are very, very, very smart and they study up on it and they become better lawyers than maybe 95% of the lawyers in the courtroom, in the courthouse that morning. But at the end of the day, how many of those really are there that can take the time and blah, blah, blah?
And this last clip is called Leave It Up to the Lawyers. Now, although the creation of this video series is intended for each individual to think deeply about learning how to protect themselves, I do want to show respect to lawyers with integrity, because even after this series, many individuals will call upon lawyers with integrity to help protect them. So maybe a future with lawyers with integrity might include the acknowledgement of superior sovereign authority and those individuals with thoughts of sovereignty in particular that bring forward integrity at the roots of what they do and say. So I think once again we've reached the point that I would describe as enough information for one video. If you'd like to view the full video for this modern lawyer and his research on the topic of sovereignty, the link will be found down below. And speaking of down below, at this point I would imagine some viewers might have questions. So feel free and comment, ask me directly, or you might want to consider at this point sending this video series or introducing this video series to that individual or group of individuals that you have heard speak about similar subject matter in the past. They might be able to help you put together some pieces of the puzzle. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in video number 6.